Parts 1 and 2 of the Appendix to The Devil's Pool. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Devil's Pool by George Sand. Translated by George B. Ives. Appendix. Part 1. The Country Wedding. Here ends the story of Germain's courtship, as he told it to me himself, cunning ploughman that he is. I ask your pardon, dear reader, for having been unable to translate it better, for the old-fashioned, artless language of the peasants of the district that I sing, as they used to say, really has to be translated. Those people speak too much French for us, and the development of the language since Rabelais and Montaigne has deprived us of much of the old wealth. It is so with all progress, and we must make up our minds to it. But it is pleasant still to hear those picturesque idioms in general use on the old soil of the centre of France, especially as they are the genuine expressions of the mockingly tranquil and pleasantly loquacious character of the people who use them. Touraine has preserved a considerable number of precious patriarchal locutions, but Touraine has progressed rapidly in civilization during and since the Renaissance. It is covered with châteaux, roads, activity, and foreigners. Berri has remained stationary, and I think that, next to Bretagne and some provinces in the extreme south of France, it is the most conservative province to be found at the present moment. Certain customs are so strange, so curious, that I hope to be able to entertain you a moment longer, dear reader, if you will permit me to describe in detail a country wedding, Germain's, for instance, which I had the pleasure of attending a few years ago. For everything passes away, alas! In the short time that I have lived, there has been more change in the ideas and customs of my village than there was for centuries before the Revolution. Half of the Celtic, pagan, or middle-aged ceremonials that I saw in full vigor in my childhood have already been done away with. Another year or two, perhaps, and the railroads will run their levels through our deep valleys, carrying away with the swiftness of lightning our ancient traditions and our wonderful legends. It was in winter, not far from the carnival, the time of year when it is considered becoming and proper among us to be married. In the summer we hardly have time, and the work on a farm cannot be postponed 3 days, to say nothing of the extra days required for the more or less laborious digestion attending the moral and physical intoxication that follows such a festivity. I was sitting under the huge mantelpiece of an old-fashioned kitchen fireplace, when pistol shots, the howling of dogs, and the shrill notes of the bagpipe announced the approach of the fiancés. Soon Père and Mère Maurice, Germain, and little Marie, followed by Jacques and his wife, the nearest relations of the bride and groom, and their godfathers and godmothers, entered the courtyard. Little Marie, not having as yet received the wedding gifts, called livrées, was dressed in the best that her modest wardrobe afforded, a dress of dark gray cloth, a white fichu with large bright-colored flowers, an apron of the color called incarnat, an Indian red then much in vogue but despised to-day, a cap of snow-white muslin and of the shape, fortunately preserved, which recalls the headdress of Anne Boleyn and Agnes Sorel. She was fresh and smiling, and not at all proud, although she had good reason to be. Germain was beside her, grave and deeply moved, like the youthful Jacob saluting Rachel at Laban's well. Any other girl would have assumed an air of importance and a triumphant bearing, for in all ranks of life it counts for something to be married for one's beau yeux. But the girl's eyes were moist and beaming with love. You could see that she was deeply smitten, and that she had no time to think about the opinions of other people. She had not lost her little determined manner, but she was all sincerity and good nature. There was nothing impertinent in her success, nothing personal in her consciousness of her strength. I never saw such a sweet fiancée as she, when she quickly answered some of her young friends who asked her if she was content. "Bless me, indeed I am. I don't complain of the good Lord." Père Maurice was the spokesman. He had come to offer the customary compliments and invitations. He began by fastening a laurel branch adorned with ribbons to the mantelpiece. That is called the exploit, that is to say, the invitation. Then he gave to each of the guests a little cross made of a bit of blue ribbon crossed by another bit of pink ribbon, the pink for the bride, the blue for the groom, and the guests were expected to keep that token to wear on the wedding day, the women in their caps, the men in their buttonholes. It was the ticket of admission. Then Père Maurice delivered his speech. He invited the master of the house and all his company, that is to say, all his children, all his relations, all his friends, all his servants, to the marriage ceremony, to the feast, to the sports, to the dancing, and to everything that comes after. He did not fail to say, "I come to do you the honor to invite you," a very proper locution, although it seems a misuse of words to us, as it expresses the idea of rendering honor to those who are deemed worthy thereof. Despite the general invitation carried thus from house to house throughout the parish, good breeding, which is extremely conservative among the peasantry, requires that only 2 persons in each family should take advantage of it, one of the heads of the family to represent the household, one of their children to represent the other members. The invitations being delivered, the fiancés and their relations went to the farm and dined together. Little Marie tended her 3 sheep on the common land, and Germain turned up the ground as if there were nothing in the air. On the day before that fixed for the marriage, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the musicians arrived, that is to say, the bagpipers and viol players, with their instruments decorated with long floating ribbons, and playing a march written for the occasion, in a measure somewhat slow for the feet of any but natives, but perfectly adapted to the nature of the heavy ground and the hilly roads of that region. Pistol shots, fired by youths and children, announced the beginning of the ceremony. The guests assembled one by one, and danced on the greensward in front of the house for practice. When night had come, they began to make strange preparations. They separated into 2 parties, and when it was quite dark, they proceeded to the ceremony of the livrée. That ceremony was performed at the home of the fiancée, La Guillette's cabin. La Guillette took with her her daughter, a dozen or more young and pretty shepherdesses, her daughter's friends or relations, 2 or 3 respectable matrons, neighbors with well-oiled tongues, quick at retort, and unyielding observers of the ancient customs. Then she selected a dozen sturdy champions, her relations and friends, and lastly the old hemp-beater of the parish, a fine and fluent talker, if ever there was one. The rôle played in Bretagne by the Bazvalan or village tailor is assumed in our country districts by the hemp-beater or the wool-carder, the 2 professions being often united in a single person. He attends all solemnities, sad or gay, because he is essentially erudite and a fine speaker, and on such occasions it is always his part to act as spokesman in order that certain formalities that have been observed from time immemorial may be worthily performed. The wandering trades which take men into the bosoms of other families and do not permit them to concentrate their attention upon their own, are well calculated to make them loquacious, entertaining, good talkers, and good singers. The hemp-beater is peculiarly skeptical. He and another rustic functionary, of whom we shall speak anon, the grave-digger, are always the strong-minded men of the neighborhood. They have talked so much about ghosts, and are so familiar with all the tricks of which those mischievous spirits are capable, that they fear them hardly at all. Night is the time when all 3, hemp-beaters, grave-diggers, and ghosts, principally exercise their callings. At night, too, the hemp-beater tells his harrowing tales. May I be pardoned for a slight digression. When the hemp has reached the proper point, that is to say, when it has been sufficiently soaked in running water and half dried on the bank, it is carried to the yards of the different houses. There they stand it up in little sheaves, which, with their stalks spread apart at the bottom and their heads tied together in balls, greatly resemble, in the dark, a long procession of little white phantoms, planted on their slim legs and walking noiselessly along the walls. At the end of September, when the nights are still warm, they begin the process of beating by the pale moonlight. During the day, the hemp has been heated in the oven. It is taken out at night to be beaten hot. For that purpose they use a sort of wooden horse, surmounted by a wooden lever, which, falling upon the grooves, breaks the plant without cutting it. Then it is that you hear at night, in the country, the sharp, clean-cut sound of 3 blows struck in rapid succession. Then there is silence for a moment. That means that the arm is moving the handful of hemp in order to break it in another place, and the 3 blows are repeated. It is the other arm acting on the lever, and so it goes on until the moon is dimmed by the first rays of dawn. As this work is done only a few days in the year, the dogs do not become accustomed to it, and howl plaintively at every point of the compass. It is the time for unusual and mysterious noises in the country. The migrating cranes fly southward at such a height that the eye can hardly distinguish them in broad daylight. At night you can only hear them, and their hoarse, complaining voices, lost among the clouds, seem like the salutation and the farewell of souls in torment, striving to find the road to heaven and compelled by an irresistible fatality to hover about the abodes of men, not far from the earth. For these migratory birds exhibit strange uncertainty and mysterious anxiety in their aerial wanderings. It sometimes happens that they lose the wind, when fitful breezes struggle for the mastery or succeed one another in the upper regions. Thereupon, when one of those reverses happens during the day, we see the leader of the line soar at random through the air, then turn sharply about, fly back, and take his place at the rear of the triangular phalanx, while a skillful maneuver on the part of his companions soon brings them into line behind him. Often, after vain efforts, the exhausted leader abandons the command of the caravan, another comes forward, takes his turn at the task, and gives place to a third, who finds the current and leads the host forward in triumph. But what shrieks, what reproaches, what remonstrances, what fierce maledictions or anxious questions are exchanged by those winged pilgrims in an unfamiliar tongue. In the resonant darkness you hear the dismal uproar circling above the houses, sometimes for a long while, and as you can see nothing, you feel, in spite of yourself, a sort of dread and a sympathetic uneasiness until the sobbing flock has passed out of hearing in space. There are other sounds that are peculiar to that time of year, and are heard principally in the orchards. The fruit is not yet gathered, and 1,000 unaccustomed snappings and crackings make the trees resemble animate beings. A branch creaks as it bends under a weight that has suddenly reached the last stage of development, or an apple detaches itself and falls at your feet with a dull thud on the damp ground. Then you hear a creature whom you cannot see, brushing against the branches and bushes as he runs away. It is the peasant's dog, the restless, inquisitive prowler, impudent and cowardly as well, who insinuates himself everywhere, never sleeps, is always hunting for nobody knows what, watches you from his hiding place in the bushes, and runs away at the noise made by a falling apple, thinking that you are throwing a stone at him. On such nights as those, gray, cloudy nights, the hemp-beater narrates his strange adventures with will-o'-the-wisps and white hares, souls in torment and witches transformed into wolves. The witches dance at the crossroads and prophetic night owls in the graveyard. I remember passing the early hours of the night thus around the moving flails, whose pitiless blow, interrupting the beater's tale at the most exciting point, caused a cold shiver to run through our veins. Often, too, the good man went on talking as he worked, and 4 or 5 words would be lost, awful words, of course, which we dared not ask him to repeat, and the omission of which imparted a more awe-inspiring mystery to the mysteries, sufficiently harrowing before, of his narrative. In vain did the servants warn us that it was very late to remain out of doors, and that the hour for slumber had long since struck for us. They themselves were dying with longing to hear more, and with what terror did we afterward walk through the hamlet on our homeward way! How deep the church porch seemed, and how dense and black the shadow of the old trees! As for the graveyard, that we did not see, we closed our eyes as we passed it. But the hemp-beater does not devote himself exclusively to frightening his hearers any more than the sacristan does. He likes to make them laugh. He is jocose and sentimental at need. When love and marriage are to be sung, he it is who collects and retains in his memory the most ancient ballads and transmits them to posterity. He it is, therefore, who, at wedding festivals, is entrusted with the character which we are to see him enact at the presentation of the livret to little Marie. Part II. The livret. When everybody was assembled in the house, the doors and windows were closed and fastened with the greatest care. They even barricaded the loophole in the attic, They placed boards, trestles, stumps, and tables across all the issues as if they were preparing to sustain a siege, and there was the solemn silence of suspense in that fortified interior until they heard in the distance singing and laughing, and the notes of the rustic instruments. It was the bridegroom's contingent, Germain at the head, accompanied by his stoutest comrades, by his relations, friends, and servants, and the grave digger, a substantial, joyous procession. But as they approached the house, they slackened their pace, took counsel together, and became silent. The maidens, shut up in the house, had arranged little cracks at the windows, through which they watched them march up and form in battle array. A fine, cold rain was falling, and added to the interest of the occasion, while a huge fire was crackling on the hearth inside. Marie would have liked to abridge the inevitable, tedious length of this formal siege. She did not like to see her lover catching cold, but she had no voice in the council under the circumstances, and indeed she was expected to join, ostensibly, in the mischievous cruelty of her companions. When the two camps were thus confronted, a discharge of firearms without created great excitement among all the dogs in the neighborhood. Those of the household rushed to the door, barking vociferously, thinking that a real attack was in progress, and the small children, whom their mothers tried in vain to reassure, began to tremble and cry. The whole scene was so well played that a stranger might well have been deceived by it and have considered the advisability of preparing to defend himself against the band of brigands. Thereupon the grave digger, the bridegroom's bard and orator, took his place in front of the door, and in a lugubrious voice began the following dialogue with the hemp beater, who was stationed at the small round window above the same door. The grave digger. Alas, my good people, my dear parishioners, for the love of God, open the door. The hemp beater. Who are you, pray, and why do you presume to call us your dear parishioners? We do not know you. The grave digger. We are honest folk in sore distress. Be not afraid of us, my friends. Receive us hospitably. The rain freezes as it falls. Our poor feet are frozen, and we have come such a long distance that our shoes are split. The hemp beater. If your shoes are split, you can look on the ground. You will surely find osier wise to make arcelets, little strips of iron in the shape of bows, with which shoes, wooden, were mended. The grave digger. Osier arcelets are not very strong. You are making sport of us, good people, and you would do better to open the door to us. We can see the gleam of a noble blaze within your house. Doubtless the spit is in place, and your hearts and your stomachs are rejoicing together. Open, then, to poor pilgrims, who will die at your door if you do not have mercy on them. The hemp beater. Aha, you are pilgrims? You did not tell us that. From what pilgrimage are you returning, by your leave? The grave digger. We will tell you that when you have opened the door, for we come from so far away that you would not believe it. The hemp beater. Open the door to you? Indeed, we should not dare trust you. Let us see. Are you from Saint-Sylvain de Pouligny? The grave digger. We have been to Saint-Sylvain de Pouligny, but we have been farther than that. The hemp beater. Then you have been as far as Saint-Solange? The grave digger. We have been to Saint-Solange for sure, but we have been farther still. The hemp beater. You lie. You have never been as far as Saint-Solange. The grave digger. We have been farther, for we have just returned from Saint-Jacques-de-Compostelle. The hemp beater. What foolish tale are you telling us? We don't know that parish. We see plainly enough that you are bad men, brigands, nobodies, liars. Go somewhere else and sing your silly songs. We are on our guard, and you won't get in here. The grave digger. Alas, my dear man, have pity on us. We are not pilgrims, as you have rightly guessed, but we are unfortunate poachers pursued by the keepers. The gendarmes are after us, too, and if you don't let us hide in your hayloft, we shall be caught and taken to prison. The hemp beater. But what proof have we this time that you are what you say? For here is one falsehood already that you could not follow up. The grave digger. If you will open the door, we will show you a fine piece of game we have killed. The hemp beater. Show it now, for we are suspicious. The grave digger. Well, open a door or window, so that we can pass in the creature. The hemp beater. Oh, nay, nay, not such fools. I'm looking at you through a little hole, and I see neither hunters nor game. At that point a drover's boy, a thick-set youth of Herculean strength, came forth from the group in which he had been standing unnoticed, and held up toward the window a goose all plucked and impaled on a stout iron spit, decorated with bunches of straw and ribbons. "Hoity-toity!" cried the hemp-beater, after he had cautiously put out an arm to feel the bird. "That's not a quail or a partridge, a hare or a rabbit. It looks like a goose or a turkey. Upon my word, you are noble hunters! And that game did not make you ride very fast. Go elsewhere, my knaves! All your falsehoods are detected, and you may as well go home and cook your supper. You won't eat ours." The Gravedigger. "Alas, mon Dieu! Where shall we go to have our game cooked? It's very little among so many of us, and besides, we have no fire nor place to go to. At this time of night every door is closed, everybody has gone to bed. You are the only ones who are having a wedding feast in your house, and you must be very hard-hearted to leave us to freeze outside. Once more, good people, let us in. We won't cause you any expense. You see we bring our own food. Only a little space at your fireside, a little fire to cook it, and we will go hence satisfied." The hemp-beater. "Do you think that we have any too much room, and that wood costs nothing?" The Gravedigger. "We have a little bundle of straw to make fire with. We will be satisfied with it. Only give us leave to place the spit across your fireplace." The hemp-beater. "We will not do it. You arouse disgust, not pity, in us. It's my opinion that you are drank, that you need nothing, and that you simply want to get into our house to steal our fire and our daughters." The Gravedigger. "As you refuse to listen to any good reason, we propose to force our way into your house." The hemp-beater. "Try it, if you choose. We are so well protected that we need not fear you. You are insolent knaves, too, and we won't answer you any more." Thereupon the hemp-beater closed the window-shutter with a great noise, and went down to the lower room by a ladder. Then he took the bride by the hand, the young people of both sexes joined them, and they all began to dance and utter joyous exclamations, while the matrons sang in piercing tones, and indulged in loud peals of laughter in token of their scorn and defiance of those who were attempting an assault without. The besiegers, on their side, raged furiously together. They discharged their pistols against the doors, made the dogs growl, pounded on the walls, rattled the shutters, and uttered terror-inspiring yells. In short, there was such an uproar that you could not hear yourself talk, such a dust and smoke that you could not see yourself. The attack was a mere pretence, however. The moment had not come to violate the laws of etiquette. If they could succeed, by prowling about the house in finding an unguarded passage, any opening whatsoever, they could try to gain an entrance by surprise. And then, if the bearer of the spit succeeded in placing his bird in front of the fire, that constituted a taking possession of the hearthstone. The comedy was at an end, and the bridegroom was victor. But the entrances to the house were not so numerous that they were likely to have neglected the usual precautions, and no one could have assumed the right to employ violence before the moment fixed for the conflict. When they were weary of jumping about and shouting, the hemp-beater meditated a capitulation. He went back to his window, opened it cautiously, and hailed the discomfited besiegers with a roar of laughter. "Well, my boys," he said, "you're pretty sheepish, aren't you? You thought that nothing would be easier than to break in here. You have discovered that our defenses are strong, but we are beginning to have pity on you, if you choose to submit and accept our conditions." The Gravedigger. "Speak, my good friends. Tell us what we must do to be admitted to your fireside." The hemp-beater. "You must sing, my friends, but sing some song that we don't know, and that we can't answer with a better one." "Never you fear," replied the Gravedigger, and he sang in a powerful voice, "'Tis 6 months since the springtime." "When I walked upon the springing grass," replied the hemp-beater in a somewhat hoarse but awe-inspiring voice. "Are you laughing at us, my poor fellows, that you sing us such old trash? You see that we stopped you at the first word." "It was the prince's daughter." "And she would married be," replied the hemp-beater. Go on to another, we know that a little too well." The Gravedigger. "What do you say to this? When from Nantes I was returning." The hemp-beater. "I was weary, do you know, oh, so weary. That's a song of my grandmother's day. Give us another one." The Gravedigger. "The other day as I was walking." The hemp-beater. "Along by yonder charming wood. That's a silly one. Our grandchildren wouldn't take the trouble to answer you. What, are those all you know?" the grave-digger. Oh, we'll sing you so many of them that you will end by stopping short. Fully an hour was passed in this contest. As the two combatants were the most learned men in the province in the matter of ballads, and as their repertory seemed inexhaustible, it might well have lasted all night, especially as the hemp-beater seemed to take malicious pleasure in allowing his opponent to sing certain laments in 10, 20, or 30 stanzas, pretending by his silence to admit that he was defeated. Thereupon there was triumph in the bridegroom's camp. They sang in chorus at the top of their voices, and every one believed that the adverse party would make default. But when the final stanza was half finished, the old hemp-beater's harsh, hoarse voice would bellow out the last words, whereupon he would shout, "You don't need to tire yourselves out by singing such long ones, my children. We have them at our fingers' ends." Once or twice, however, the hemp-beater made a wry face, drew his eyebrows together, and turned with a disappointed air toward the observant matrons. The grave-digger was singing something so old that his adversary had forgotten it, or perhaps had never known it. But the good dames instantly sang the victorious refrain through their noses, in tones as shrill as those of the sea-gull, and the grave-digger, summoned to surrender, passed to something else. It would have been too long to wait until one side or the other won the victory. The bride's party announced that they would show mercy on condition that the other should offer her a gift worthy of her. Thereupon the song of the livrée began, to an air as solemn as a church chant. The men outside sang in unison, "Ouvrez la porte, ouvrez, Marie, mon mignon, j'ai de beaux cadeaux à vous présenter. Hélas, mamie, laissez-nous entrer." To which the women replied from the interior in falsetto, in doleful tones, "Mon père est en chagrin, ma mère est grande tristesse, et moi je suis fille de trop grande merci pour ouvrir ma porte à cette heure ici." The men repeated the first stanza down to the fourth line, which they modified thus, "J'ai un beau mouchoir à vous présenter." But the women replied, in the name of the bride, in the same words as before. Through 20 stanzas at least, the men enumerated all the gifts in the livrée, always mentioning a new article in the last verse, a beautiful devanteau, apron, lovely ribbons, a cloth dress, lace, a gold cross, even to 100 pins, to complete the bride's modest outfit. The matrons invariably refused, but at last the young men decided to mention a handsome husband to offer, and they replied by addressing the bride, and singing to her with the men, "Ouvrez la porte, ouvrez, Marie, mon mignon, c'est un beau man qui vient vous chercher. Allons, mamie, laissons-les entrer." End of parts 1 and 2 of the Appendix of the Devil's Pool.